So, today we're going to look past all the headlines about rocket launches and space tourism. We're going to dive into the real business of space. We're breaking down the economic realities of what everyone's calling new space. And it's an industry that's way less about exploration and far more about creating real, lasting value right here on Earth. Let's get into it. When we talk about space, it's almost always framed by these huge, almost mythic ambitions. This quote from SpaceX, it captures that spirit perfectly. It's inspiring, it's massive, and it's the kind of vision that has pulled in incredible talent and, of course, a ton of capital. It's the story we all think we know. Okay, but for those of us who are actually trying to build things, for the entrepreneurs, the operators, the investors, a vision like that, as powerful as it is, it brings up a much more fundamental question. Beyond the awe and the spectacle, is there a sustainable, profitable business here? I mean, can you really build a durable company on extending the light of consciousness? And look, to get to the answer, we have to completely reframe how we even think about this. The entire key to understanding the real opportunity in space today is making this one crucial shift, moving our focus away from the mission, that one-off achievement, and towards the market, which demands a continuous return on investment. And believe me, that shift changes everything. Which brings us to our first big idea, really digging into the difference between a historic moonshot and a modern, sustainable industry. Think about it. The Apollo program, an incredible, magnificent achievement, no doubt. But what was it really? It was symbolic. It was episodic. It was driven by national pride and a fire hose of public money. New space? It's the polar opposite. It's operational, it's commercial, it's continuous, and it is absolutely driven by the hunt for ROI. It's not about planting a flag anymore, it's about building a business. And here's the absolute critical point. For all its glory, Apollo didn't create what we'd call an economic flywheel. There were no compounding returns, right? It didn't create its own demand. So when the political will dried up, so did the funding. A real industry, on the other hand, builds a flywheel where every success fuels more investment and opens up new markets, creating its own momentum. All right, so if it's not about these one-off missions, then what is it about? Well, this is where a lot of people get tripped up. They think the whole story of new space is just about reusable rockets, but that's only a piece of the puzzle. Now, don't get me wrong, reusable launch systems? Absolutely critical. A total game changer. I mean, dramatically lowering the cost to get to orbit, that was the key that unlocked the whole thing. But, and this is a big but, cheaper access by itself, it's not enough. It's not sufficient to build a real industry. It's a necessary feature for sure, but it's not the product. The real value isn't just in getting to orbit. It's what you do once you're there. This is the real inflection point. The whole game changed when space stopped being a place you just visit and became infrastructure you actually use every single day. For communications, for positioning, for timing, observation, all of it. The war in Ukraine was a brutal, real-world stress test of this idea. When the networks on the ground were destroyed, space-based systems like Starlink kept working. This wasn't some kind of demo. This was hard proof that space is now absolutely critical infrastructure. This follows a classic pattern we've seen before. Think about electricity or cloud computing. These foundational platforms create just massive value. And it happens precisely when they become, well, boring. When they become habitual. Nobody gets excited about the fiber optic cable in the ground, but entire economies are built on top of it because it just works. Space is making that same transition right now, from heroic to habitual. So this big shift from heroic to just habitual, it creates a whole new value chain. So if the launch is just the taxi ride, where's the real money being made? Where's the value actually being captured? Well, if you look at history, the lesson is crystal clear. The folks who build the physical infrastructure, the railroads, the early telecom networks, they almost never capture most of the long-term value. They enable the market, sure, but it's the companies that build the services on top of that infrastructure, the manufacturers, the software platforms, that generate the real compounding returns. Space is going to follow that same exact pattern. So let's break down this new space value stack. At the bottom, you've got launch. That just gets you in the door. Then you have the constellations. That's the platform itself. But the real asset, the raw material of this whole economy, it's the data that flows from that platform. And the final product, the highest margin thing you can sell, it's the AI-driven insights you pull from that data. You can see the value moving up the stack, from physical hardware to pure software. Okay, let's zero in on the top of that stack, because this is where it gets really interesting. This is where new space stops looking like an aerospace industry and starts looking like a software and AI industry. You see, because of cheaper launch and all these new constellations, collecting massive amounts of data from orbit, that's actually the easy part now. Seriously, that problem is basically solved. The bottleneck has moved. It's all about interpretation. That's the new challenge, and that's the new multi-trillion-dollar opportunity. The data that's coming down is just this raw, noisy, massive fire hose. It's not a nice, clean spreadsheet. The real value is in making sense of it all at a scale that no human team could ever hope to manage. And think about it from the customer's perspective. They are not buying raw data. A big agriculture company, they don't want satellite imagery. They want to buy yield optimization. A logistics firm doesn't care about telemetry data. They want predictive coordination that tells them how to fix a problem before it even happens. A hedge fund, they don't want pretty pictures. They want to find an arbitrage opportunity hours before anyone else. What they're buying is a better decision. So what this all boils down to is time compression. The real competitive advantage here isn't about seeing more. It's about knowing something crucial sooner and being able to act on it better and faster than anyone else. That is the product. All right, so let's pull all of this together. What does this mean as an investment thesis, and what are some of the, let's say, sober realities of this market now that it's starting to grow up? Look, the era of just romanticizing space and throwing money at speculative SPACs, that's over. The disciplined capital is moving in now, and it's asking some pretty direct, maybe even unfashionable, but absolutely essential questions. Who's the customer? How often do they pay? At what margin? And what makes this business defensible in the long run? We also have to be really honest about the environment up there. Orbit is a shared resource, right? It's finite. And that means it's vulnerable to the tragedy of the commons. We're talking about debris, congestion. These are real growing problems. And just like with every other big tech leap in history, the rules and regulations are going to lag way behind the technology. The businesses that win will be the ones that are resilient, the ones built for an imperfect world, not ones that need ideal conditions to survive. And that brings us right back to the central thesis of this whole explainer. The physical infrastructure, the rockets, the satellites, that stuff enables the market. It's critical. But it's the intelligence layer, the AI, the software, the services built on top, that's going to capture the lion's share of the value. So we want to leave you with one final thought here. The great space race of this century, it's not about getting to orbit anymore. That's becoming a logistics problem. The real race, the one that's going to define who has economic power for the next generation, is all about who can translate that fire hose of data from orbit into a real, decisive advantage down here on Earth. So the multi-trillion-dollar question is, who is going to build that translation layer?